Hi, and welcome back to Football Made Simple. Barcelona fell at their first major hurdle in the Europa League as United went through 2-1, with Erik ten Hag's tactical adjustments showing why he might, at the moment, be a level above Xavi. But what exactly were Xavi's tactics in possession, and what went right and wrong? Let's take a look. And a lot of you have been asking what software I use for my analysis, and it's called Once Video Analyzer Pro. And it's already pretty affordable, but I've teamed up with them to give any of you who want to try it a further 10% off by using the code FMS10. So visit their website through the link in the description below if you're interested. Early on in the game, United weren't looking to press too high when Ter Stegen had the ball, as he is so good on the ball that he's basically a third man, so United didn't want to commit the number of outfield players it would take to make it an effective press. So often Araujo and Christensen were able to split either side of Weghorst, and one of the two centre-backs would be able to receive easily from Ter Stegen to begin the play. But once the ball was in open play, Barcelona used various patterns to try and exploit the flanks during this match. This is because whilst initially United would be defending in a fairly disciplined 4-1-4-1, with Busquets and De Jong often becoming somewhat of a double pivot that Sancho and Fred would pick up, with Weghorst cutting off one of the centre backs. When the other had the ball, United's wingers would then be triggered in the press. And if Araujo was on the ball, it was often Rashford who would be drawn in off the left-hand side. Alternatively, this could function the opposite way, with Fernandes instead being drawn in. Either way, they were looking to apply pressure on the two centre-backs man-to-man. There were different ways Barcelona dealt with this, as firstly, they could go back to Ter Stegen, and with one of the wingers having been drawn in, there would be a fairly easy pass for him out to the fullback, and down the right, Wan-Bissaka could be drawn high, creating space in this region. This pattern could extend into open play, because much like the first leg, where Gavi started as the left winger, Roberto committed to coming in central early, and Wan-Bissaka would be drawn in with him, looking to stay tight on his man. Of course, this would now mean that Balde had the freedom of the left-hand side, and he was impressive in the attacking phases, making the most of the space that he got to get into good crossing positions, and even if he wasn't completely free in these zones, he was still effective in the 1v1, having the joint most dribbles during this match. So here, just out of shot, we see that Fernandes had been drawn higher up the pitch, and Roberto coming infield has drawn Wan-Bissaka towards him. So when the ball comes to Roberto, who's completely central, Balde at the bottom of the screen has tons of space to attack, which leads him to receive, although in this case Fernandes has tracked back well. But this shape, with Roberto having come in narrow to form somewhat of a midfield box, would mean that there was a potential for a 4 versus 3 overload in central regions. But one thing that United did well to mitigate this overload, especially when they were in deeper defense, was keeping the space between the back line and the rest of the midfield fairly small, so that even when the United men were on the ball, it would be difficult to find these men in behind the midfield. This was combined, especially in the first half, with wingers in Fernandes and Rashford who could defend narrower, so that their cover shadows were helping to contribute to covering the passes to the men between the lines. These scenarios may have been different for Barcelona if they had had Gavi and Pedri available, who are both much better technically than Kessie and Roberto, and could perhaps have carved out some space even in these tight regions to create for others. But instead, due to the overload, what we saw was Barcelona having more of the ball, but not being able to find incisive passes to men higher up the pitch. But down the right hand side, Barcelona attacked differently, because Koundé isn't quite as attacking as Balde. So, when Rashford was drawn in central, we could at times see Koundé beginning deeper as the right centre back, although he was also more than willing to attack the space when it was available. And there were occasions where he was able to get higher up the pitch past Rashford. So here we see a scenario where Rashford is drawn high, and Ter Stegen goes for the ball over the top to Koundé, has shifted to a more traditional right-back zone. He has a lot more room to attack. But down the right-hand side, the dynamism of Kessie played a much bigger role. Busquets and De Jong's positioning tended to tie up Sancho and Fred, so when Koundé received, whether as a right centre-back or a right back, United had a tougher time defending. This is because in the midfield region, Casemiro would potentially be having to deal with both Kessie and Roberto, unless one of the centre-backs was willing to step out of defence to assist. Of course, ball side, Casemiro would look to drift towards Kessie, and Rafinha was tying up Shaw. However, with Rashford central and at times not recovering, as Koundé advanced up the pitch, Casemiro would have to move wider to confront him, and Kessie was industrious in his work in making runs into this half space to potentially get into crossing zones, but again, not too much came of this despite getting into good positions. So, in that same scenario, we see that Casemiro is beginning to switch his focus to the man on the ball, and Lewandowski does look to drop into this region. But what we can also see is that Shaw's eyes are fixed on Rafinha, and Kessie would have been free in the half space. But Casemiro manages to make the interception. In the second half, Barcelona still had much more of the ball, however the press from United was more intense. Rashford as the forward was much more mobile in looking to help press the centre-backs, whilst Antony out on the right hand side was happier to start wide and keep an eye on Balde. So when pressing, United would often start with more of this 4-2-3-1. Sancho off the left hand side would be in this narrower position, so that he could both look to potentially spring to Koundé when he received, as he tended to operate deeper, but his positioning and cover shadow also made this pass to Kessie much more difficult. So it was harder for Barcelona to make the most of their overload in the midfield, giving Casemiro more freedom to drift around this region to snuff out any attacks before they became truly dangerous. Overall, this was a leg of gambles. Xavi looked to take advantage of Balde down the left hand side, but ended up paying dearly with United's advances down their right hand side paying off. It is unfortunate that Xavi had two of his better players missing, so that must be mentioned. But Ten Hag's in-game management also shows that at this moment he may be at a different level. For the manager tactical score, Ten Hag earns a 7 purely due to his adaptation, but the gap tactically was not too big, and Xavi did have to contend with injuries, meaning he still earns a 5.5. If you want to look more in depth at Ten Hag's tactics, the video is already on the channel and linked in the cards now. But what are your thoughts and ratings on the managers? Drop them down below.
I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, you might enjoy the content available on my Patreon. Not only does Patreon help to support the continued production of content, as I am a one-man team, but it also gives you early access to videos that will come on the channel. You'll also get exclusive videos, get to vote on polls, and so much more. And it's cheaper than ever, no longer having a tier system, so everyone on the Patreon gets access to all the content. So head over to patreon.com/footballmadesimple to check it out.
And a special thanks to my latest patrons like Jay Finn, Lao Tiong Yi, Dogba Bass, James Lang, Ahmad Assad, and Rodrigo Martinez.
But that's all for today, and remember, keep it simple.